Who in your life helped you understand the significance of being together around the table? Maybe your parents, trying to get you to behave when you sit down. I remember once when I was maybe 7 years old, our family was going to be present at a dinner where you were required to be dressed and behave yourself. And so it wasn't just, oh, we're going out to dinner on such and such a day, you have to be dressed and behave yourself. No. My dad said we're going to practice. And so we had to go up and put on white shirts and sport coats and ties and come down and sit down at the table and behave ourselves and be still at the table. Well, soup was served, and then we had to eat soup. And you know, there were myself, my two brothers on one side of the table, our three sisters on the other side of the table, my dad at the head of the table, and my mom getting everything and serving everyone. And we sat there and we practiced and we ate and we used our napkins. We didn't use our sleeve. We used our napkins, and it was training in good behavior just to see if we could pull it off for one night. For one night could we sit down at a table at a dinner where other people were behaving themselves and we would behave ourselves. And it was a dream fulfilled. I remember going, and I don't remember there being any issues. I remember they brought soup and I thought, oh, I've done this before, you know. I had been trained and it was wonderful. And, you know, I think I fell asleep about halfway through and woke up and we were on our way home. It had gone beautifully. And I remember that. I remember teachers I had in high school who were concerned about me, that, you know, they weren't quite sure if I'd been raised in a family or if I'd been raised by wolves. And so occasionally after school, they'd say, oh, you know, come over, we'll have, it was an English teacher, teacher of economics, and my Norwegian teacher, and they were all friends. So they would be at the table and I would be there and they'd talk, and occasionally another student would join us and we would talk about things, and they would just make sure that I was taking care of myself and learning to be together in community. I was very fortunate that there were people in the school who thought, you know, well, this guy's not so bad, but he can spin out of orbit, and we need to help him learn to stay seated and focused and engage appropriately in conversation. And that was a good thing. And then in seminary, there was someone who really didn't realize how important they were in helping me understand the significance of being together at the table. New Testament professor, Johann Christian Becker. And the first time I saw him was not in the classroom. The first time I saw him was in a restaurant in Palmer Square on Nassau Street in Princeton, and it was the first week of school, first week of classes. And I'd wander down onto Nassau Street, which is the main street in downtown Princeton. There was a beautiful restaurant there on the corner in Palmer Square. Big picture windows, and there were a couple of tables inside those windows, very expensive restaurant. And there was Dr. Becker sitting at one of the tables inside that window with another one of the professors at the seminary, and they both had these big brandy glasses. And they were sitting, and Dr. Becker had his beret on, and they were talking and had these brandy glasses and were spinning the brandy in the glasses. They'd drink a little bit, and then they'd talk. And I remember looking in the window and thinking, wow, wouldn't it be so cool to be in there and to eat? That is like, who gets in there? How do you get in there? I could never imagine myself being in that restaurant and eating. And truth be told, I never did go in that restaurant and eat. it was professors, and it was important Princeton people and Johnson & Johnson people. Those were the guys who went and ate in there. Every once in a while, someone would say, oh, I think I saw Jimmy Stewart in the restaurant, and then people would go into town because Jimmy Stewart was a famous alumni of Princeton, and they would bring him back occasionally, and then people would have a Jimmy Stewart sighting, and that would lead you to go into downtown to look to see if you could see him. Never did go and eat in that restaurant. But I remember seeing Dr. Becker there, and then I remember seeing Dr. Becker at every student event that we had. It was like he had signed up to be a chaperone. So if there was a student celebration or a dance or something, he was always there, and he was always eating whatever it was that was served. Most of the time it was those rectangular sandwiches. The white crusted bread with something cream cheesy in the middle, maybe some deviled ham, maybe some chicken salad, a little rectangle of white bread with no crusts, and that's what you had. And I remember he was always eating something, always there, always enjoying himself. And so my senior year at divinity school, it was Diana's first year in divinity school. And we had kind of gone out a couple of times, but not on a real date. We'd gone out with friends. And I knew that the time had come to ask her out on a real date. So I had to go and get some insight into where to go, where to bring Diana on our first real date. Now, for me, I recognized that they had just opened up a Burger King on Nassau Street. And Burger King had never been in Princeton before. They'd opened up a Burger King. And later in our relationship, I took Diana to Burger King on a date, and she looked at me and said, "You actually eat here?" So yes, that's the rest of the story. But I did not take her to Burger King on our first date. I got some advice from someone who knew a thing or two about how important it is to be together at the table. So I went to Dr. Becker and I said, if you were going to take someone on a special date, where would you bring them? He said, oh, are you familiar with New York? And I said, well, yeah, I'm serving a church in Brooklyn. He said, oh, there's a lovely restaurant on West 50th Street, Chez Napoleon. Make your reservation. Get there early, you'll have a wonderful time. So I made the reservation and we went and we had a wonderful time. Unbelievable. We went back 20 years later and had dinner again. It's still open. It's still open. 50th Street in New York City. Make your reservations, get there early. You're going to have a wonderful time. Unbelievable. And he was absolutely right. What he taught me is whether you're in the expensive restaurant where Jimmy Stewart goes to eat, or you're at the student gathering, or you're sitting down at a table on your first official date in a French restaurant in New York City. That time together at the table is the most important time in your life. He also talked a lot about how much time Jesus spent at the table. If you took his class on New Testament theology, he would talk about Jesus at the table with his disciples. The first thing Jesus does after healing Peter's mother-in-law is sit down, and his mother-in-law serves sandwiches. So Jesus sits down and eats at Peter's house right at the beginning of his ministry. And then he travels down the road a little bit and he calls Matthew to be his disciple and sits down at Matthew's house, and they're together at the table and they have a meal, and the disciples and Jesus and Matthew and the Pharisees and the community all gather at Matthew's house and have a celebration, and Jesus eats at the home of a Pharisee, and then he eats out in the fields with 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fish, and they have a wonderful meal together out in the on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, on a hillside overlooking the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus feeds 5,000 people. And then he goes and eats at another Pharisee's house, and then he goes and eats at the home of Mary and Martha, and then he goes and eats at the home of a chief Pharisee, which is where we are today, but this is is not the end of the journey. He'll go on and eat at the home of Zacchaeus. He'll eat at the home of Mary and Martha. And Lazarus, he'll have the Last Supper with his disciples in the upper room. And after his resurrection, what does he do? He eats with 2 disciples in Emmaus. He eats again with the disciples gathered in Jerusalem. And he has a meal with them and says, I'm going to be sending the Spirit of God upon you, and the power of God will come to you. Stay here in the city. One meal after another. And that is the reality of our lives. We share one meal after another, and we fail to recognize how important that time is. And what a gift and a blessing it is to be together at the table. In our gospel lesson today, we share a meal and there's no menu. It doesn't say what was served. It just says these are the people who were there. Because what's important when you get together at the table isn't the food that's there on the table. It's the faces of those who are with you at the table. When you sit down together with people you love, that is the blessing of God. And Jesus is at a meal at the home of a Pharisee, and he starts sharing a parable, and it's a very ordinary parable. I mean, nothing earth-shaking or monumental about this parable. This is not the parable of the Good Samaritan, which everybody remembers. This isn't the parable of the prodigal son, which everybody remembers. This is an ordinary, everyday parable when you come together to sit down. No, when you come together at a wedding banquet to sit down, choose the seat of humility, because the one who humbles himself will be exalted, the one who exalts himself will be humbled. Whenever you're invited to a wedding banquet, that's how he begins the parable. That is the teaching. Whenever you're invited to a wedding banquet, when was the last time you were invited to a wedding banquet? You see, Jesus is up to something. Whenever, should it ever happen that you're invited to a wedding banquet, and what he's saying is, every time you sit down together with someone to share a meal, it is a wedding banquet. Every meal is a wedding banquet. Anytime we come together, right there in the Pharisee's house, Jesus and his disciples and the gathered community, that is a wedding banquet. That is a day of celebration. You sit down at a table with your family in your own dining room, or you sit down in the living room with TV trays. It's a wedding banquet. It is a celebration of the blessing of God. That's what that is. And we don't even recognize it. We just shovel food into our faces and go for the ice cream and then say, what do you want to watch? That's how we do it. And Jesus says, that is not the way to do it. See the faces of the people who are there with you. Treasure them. Affirm them, encourage them, celebrate them. It is a wedding banquet, what you share in that precious time. Every meal is a wedding banquet, and we forget that. And then you see something that awakens you and helps you recognize and realize that that is absolutely the truth, and we are called to live that reality in our lives every day. And so this past Wednesday, we gathered to celebrate Barbara Detlor's life. And Barbara, we remember her. She would come in with Everett. God bless you, Everett. And she would have her little dog, Sasha, and they would sit together and then come for coffee fellowship. She loved coffee fellowship. And they had a lot of meals together. And I didn't realize until Wednesday, when I saw the pictures, that they ate almost every day at In-N-Out Burger. There were pictures of Everett and Barbara and friends at In-N-Out Burger with hats on and the burger in front of them. And then I got the story from Everett's niece, Kelly, where, they would go there so often, the folks would see Everett's car pull up in the handicapped space, and then they come out and open the door, bring them in, sit them down. They always ordered the same thing, so the people working at In-N-Out Burger knew what they were going to have. One burger, split down the middle, an order of fries, a chocolate shake, and a Coke. And that's what they got every time. They would prepare the meal, bring it to their table, treated them like royalty at In-N-Out Burger, and it was a wedding banquet. Unbelievable. And the smiles on their faces and the joy you could feel coming off of a simple photograph for the appreciation of what a gift and a blessing it is to share a meal together with someone whom you hold dear in your heart. Every meal is a wedding banquet. And wherever you sit at that meal is a seat of honor and a seat of humility at the same time. You're honored to be there. You're honored to be there, and it is a gift and a blessing of the goodness of God to be there. It's an honor to be at the table with someone you love. And it's an opportunity for a lesson in humility. Because contrary to what some of us think some of the time, it's not all about us. Our culture is steeped in a sense of how it is all about us. It's all about us. You don't get into college because you write an essay that says, I majored in humility. I tried to take the lowest place. I didn't try to be in the spotlight. I tried to minimize the numbers of accolades I received. I really tried to stay in the background and let others be in the spotlight. That was my best gift. Nobody writes that essay. They all write about all the great things they did. And if you watch sports on TV, somebody hits a home run and they think it's all about me, and they flip the bat and they run around the bases and they talk trash to the other players. If you watch a football game, somebody scores a touchdown and they're dancing in the end zone, failing to recognize that it was everybody else on their team on the field in that moment, and all the work and preparation that led up to that one moment for them that they were participants in. And other people sacrificed to make their moment happen. But we don't think about that. We think about ourselves. And it's easy to get negative and to grumble and murmur is the great biblical word for when you're going to eat and you're not particularly happy with your surroundings or your circumstances or what you're going through. The Hebrews did it for 40 years, going through the wilderness, eating manna, which was a gift from God. And instead of saying, thank you, God, for the gift and blessing of this meal this day, they murmured all the way and said, good Lord, manna again. But it's an opportunity for humility. A blessing that comes from sitting down and recognizing that you are a recipient in the goodness and the gladness of God. To celebrate others for the sacrifices they make in making your life richer and fuller and better and more beautiful. Every seat is a seat of honor and a seat of humility. And Jesus reminds us that everyone is welcome at the table. Everyone is welcome at the table. Now, sometimes we take issue with that because we can think of people that we are fully prepared to say, yeah, when I sit down to eat, I don't want them anywhere near the table. And Jesus says, you are not invited to sit in the judgment seat. You are invited to come and participate in the wedding banquet. And so the opportunity is given us to recognize that everyone is welcome at the table. And it's hard to get there. Sometimes it's really hard to recognize that there is a place for everyone. And that means everyone in our families, our friends, the people we don't understand, the people we feel have hurt us or wronged us. Because God is the host. God makes the meal possible. And God says somewhere in that gathering, there is room for everyone. It's hard when we don't live that way. It's hard when families talk about literally a wedding dinner and, oh, no, we can't invite them. They don't get along with these people. And so we can't have both of them in the same gathering at the same time. So we'll have to invite them to a different thing and invite them to this thing because we can't have them together in the same place. I mean, how hard is that? How crazy is that? Or I was speaking with someone not long ago who was going to a wedding. And he said, I'm going and I'm going to support my friend, the groom. He and his bride, bride-to-be, going to be married that day, have been together a long time. They're in their 30s. But his parents aren't coming to the wedding because they feel that the bride isn't good enough for him. How do you do that? I hope they showed up. I hope they found a way to be there. Or I hope they found a way to build the bridge to repair the relationship. Because we need to be there. We need to find a way to be together at the table even when it's hard. Because everyone belongs. So if you were going to put on a banquet, who would be at your table? What invitations would you send out from right where you are to say, I want you there, and I want you there, and the guest list is unlimited. You know, you bring in your crazy relatives from back east and they come. And you bring in crazy relatives from the south and from the north and gather people together. And friends, maybe friends that you haven't seen in a long, long time. Maybe friends and family members who have gone on to be with God in glory. And you say, you're coming back just for one meal. And we're going to sit and we're going to enjoy ourselves and share in the celebration of God. Who is on your guest lists? And imagine that gathering. And maybe you've had a gathering not unlike that recently, and you still feel how precious and special that was. And so I think of a wedding celebration I attended. As a minister, you do weddings. That's one of the things you do. When we were first married and I was first doing weddings, we went to almost all of the receptions because it was dinner. You know, it was a thing. You go, dinner, prepared food, let's do this. But then you have kids and you get older and it's Saturday for a wedding and you don't want to stay out Saturday night at a reception because you got church on Sunday, and so you don't go to all the receptions, but you go to some. And I went to one not long ago. We went to one. And there were about 100 or so guests in the room. And it was there was music playing, and the bride's family was there. The groom's family was there. Friends from college were there. Old friends were there. Family members had gathered. About 100 people. And the music played, and everybody ate, and there was festivity and joy. And the groom came up to me and gave me a big hug and looked me right in the eye, and he said, you know what? I love every single person in this room. And in that moment, he did. And Jesus says, that's not an experience we should know for a moment. That's an experience we should live in our lives every day. Because every time we sit together at the table, it is the wedding banquet. And every seat at the table is a seat of honor and a place of humility. And everyone is welcome at the table. Until that day, we can say with full and generous hearts, I love every single person in this room. That's how God feels about all of us. And He invites us to feel that way about each other. The one who humbles himself will be exalted. The one who exalts himself will be humbled. This is the wedding banquet of the Lord. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.